All right, so today we're diving back into Middle-earth.
Back to the Shire, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. But you know how everyone thinks of it as all peaceful and idyllic? We're looking at how Tolkien uses those early chapters to set up, well, basically the entire fate of the world.
It's brilliant, really. You have these hobbits perfectly content with their routines.
Second breakfast? Anyone.
Exactly. But Tolkien subtly introduces this undercurrent of unease, this sense that something is off. Even in the Shire.
Like even just the way those dwarves show up.
Right. They're obviously troubled by something.
Super secretive, though.
Classic dwarf move. But it makes you realize the Shire, for all its cozy charm, isn't isolated anymore.
It's like, boom, suddenly the stakes are higher. And you know what else is interesting? That whole thing with the necromancer from The Hobbit.
You're talking about how Gandalf was so worried about it back then.
Yeah, it felt kind of ominous, but also like a totally separate story.
Right. Well, Tolkien masterfully ties it all together. Remember how Gandalf was worried about this mysterious necromancer? Turns out, that's Sauron.
No way! Seriously?
Oh yeah. Back in Mordor and gathering power, suddenly those seemingly small details from The Hobbit, they take on a whole new meaning.
It's like that feeling when you realize the whole story is so much bigger than you thought.
Exactly. And it gets even more intense when we meet Frodo. 17 years after Bilbo's vanishing act, remember?
And he's not just living it up in Bag End, is he?
No, not at all. He's restless. That same feeling we were talking about earlier,
Mm.
about feeling stuck.
Even when you have everything you're supposed to want.
Exactly. Frodo's got it all, comfort, security, the legacy of Bilbo. But Tolkien brilliantly captures this inner conflict in him, like he's searching for something more.
Trying to step out of Bilbo's shadow, maybe?
That's it. He loves Bilbo, obviously, but there's this need to forge his own path. And then Gandalf shows up and drops the truth about the ring.
Talk about your world being turned upside down.
Right. It's not just some cool heirloom. It's the one ring, forged by Sauron, meant to rule all the other rings. Every time I read that scene where Gandalf throws it in the fire.
One ring to rule them all.
Chills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien could have just told us about the ring, but instead he shows us. Makes it so much more powerful.
And then there's the whole story about Gollum.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Gollum. It's tragic to think he was once so different before the ring. And the way Tolkien connects hobbits to Gollum, he even says they understood one another.
What do you think he's getting at there?
Well, maybe it's a way of saying even the most monstrous creatures weren't always that way, that there's always more to the story.
And then there's that moment where Frodo asks why Gandalf didn't just, put Gollum out of his misery.
And Gandalf's response, so powerful, so telling about Tolkien's whole worldview. He says, many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them?
I mean, can you imagine having to answer that?
It's a heavy question, and it really makes you think about mercy, about judgment.
Especially when you're talking about a being like Gollum.
And this is just the beginning, remember?
Right, Frodo still has to decide what to do with the ring.
And that, as they say, is a whole other story.
So, we're back, and Frodo's got this, let's be honest, terrifying destiny staring him in the face.
And the more we understand about the ring, the scarier it gets.
It's not just like, oh, look, I'm invisible. It's way more insidious than that.
Right. It's like that old saying, power corrupts. But this is like corruption on steroids.
Totally.
Tolkien talks about it almost like a disease. It gets in your head, twists your desires, your fears. It doesn't just give you power, it warps you from the inside.
Okay, now that's just creepy. Remember that part where Gandalf is talking about the people who use the ring too much?
Where how they become like ghosts?
Yeah. Shadows stuck in some spirit world. That's when you realize this is serious business.
No kidding. It explains why Gandalf is so freaked out by the thing.
Like flat out refuses to touch it.
Which is wild when you think about it. You'd figure a wizard, especially Gandalf, would be the perfect person to handle this thing.
Right, but he's basically like, nope, not going to go there.
And he admits it. He says the desire for it, even with good intentions, would be too much.
If Gandalf's scared, you know it's bad news.
Exactly. That's one of the things I love about Tolkien, how he understood human nature. Even the best of us can be tempted, corrupted, which actually might be why hobbits make such good ring bearers.
What? Because they're so into the simple things.
Yeah. They're not out there trying to rule the world. Remember what Gandalf says, soft as butter, but also tough as old tree roots. They've got this inner strength that makes them surprisingly resistant.
You can definitely see that in Frodo. Although even in these early chapters, you can see the ring starting to mess with him.
For sure. Like that bit where he tries to throw it in the fire.
He just can't
It's heartbreaking, this
Mhm.
tiny moment that shows how strong a hold it already has on him.
It's like this constant battle in his head, and he's got to carry that on top of everything else.
It emphasizes how much he's going to need his companions. He can't do this alone.
Well, speaking of companions, I think it's time we talk about everyone's favorite gardener, Samwise Gamgee.
Ah, yes, Sam. From overhearing secrets to becoming, well, Sam.
And it all starts with Gandalf kind of roping him into the whole thing.
Poor Sam. Hey, you like adventures. But it's more than that, isn't it? Look at how upset Sam is that Frodo might face this danger alone. He's completely loyal,
That's what I love about Sam. His heart is always in the right place.
and Gandalf sees that. He knows Sam's love for Frodo will be his biggest strength.
It's true. Sometimes having someone who believes in you is all it takes.
Right. Plus, let's be real, Sam's practical side is going to come in handy.
Someone's got to remember the Lemba spread.
Exactly. He's grounded. That'll be important, especially as things get tougher. But what I love about their friendship, it reminds us that we don't need to be some big hero to make a difference.
It's the everyday stuff, right? Kindness, loyalty, being there for someone.
Especially at a time when, well, the world was a pretty dark place. Remember, Tolkien was writing this during a time of war.
And he still chose to tell a story about hope.
Exactly. And how ordinary people can do extraordinary things. It's a message that we need now, maybe more than ever.
Okay, so the ring has got to go.
Right to Mount Doom, even. But that's easier said than done, right?
That's what I'm saying. We've talked about why it has to happen, but how does Frodo actually, do it?
Well, for starters, he can't do it alone.
That's where the fellowship comes in.
Exactly. It's not just about company on a long journey,
Although that helps.
of course. But Tolkien is showing us how vital that support system is, especially against the ring.
Because that thing messes with your head.
Big time. But the fellowship, they become this force multiplier for good.
Okay, I like that. And it starts with Sam, basically.
Well, Gandalf kind of throws him into it.
He does. Hey, Sam, want to go on an adventure?
Mm.
It's almost funny.
Poor Sam.
But you can see he's just heartbroken at the thought of Frodo going off alone.
Because that's Sam, loyal to the core.
And I think that's what Gandalf picks up on, right? He even says Sam's love for Frodo will be his shield.
It's such a powerful idea that sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a sword, it's just love.
It's true, though. Think about the people who've helped you through tough times.
Absolutely. And on a practical level, let's not forget, Sam's the one who's actually packed for a journey.
Right. Frodo would probably forget his head if it wasn't attached.
Exactly. Sam's grounded, practical.
Mm-hmm.
Everything Frodo needs to help keep him, well, him.
And suddenly we're back to those everyday heroes we were talking about.
Because it's not always about grand gestures.
Exactly. Sometimes it's about showing up for a friend, being there for someone, even when things are tough.
Especially when things are tough.
Mhm.
And let's not forget, Tolkien was writing this when the world was at war.
It makes you think, this story about hobbits, it meant something even bigger back then, didn't it?
It did. It reminded people that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope, and that even the smallest acts of courage can make a difference.
And that's a message we can all use, right? No matter what kind of ring we're dealing with in our own lives.
Well said. And on that note, we come to the end of our deep dives into the early parts of The Lord of the Rings.
From the Shire to the ring to the forming of the Fellowship, it's incredible how much Tolkien packs into just a few chapters.
It's a masterclass in storytelling, and it sets the stage for one of the greatest adventures ever told.
So we hope you'll grab a copy of the book, maybe a second breakfast of your own, and continue the journey. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.